This is ABC News, continuing live coverage of the war with Iraq. I'm Peter Jennings at ABC News headquarters in New York. You are seeing what would normally be, for some parts of the country, ABC's World News Tonight, but as you can tell, our coverage has been continuing for many hours and will continue for many hours more. But just to begin this particular period at 7 o'clock Eastern Time, 4 o'clock in the Pacific time zone, a brief review of the day's developments and the U.S. war against Iraq. As of now, U.S. and British forces launched a new round of cruise missile attacks at government facilities in Baghdad. They were launched both from the Persian Gulf and from the Red Sea, both by ships and by submarines, both by the American forces and by the British forces as well. And then U.S.-led forces in Kuwait launched a ground assault against Iraq. We've most recently heard that the 3rd Infantry Division has begun to move within the last few moments. Or last few minutes anyway. And there are reports denied by Iraq and not confirmed by U.S. command that the Iraqi port town of Qasr, which is just below Basra on your map there, has been captured. That's the Fa Peninsula, as they call it there. That is Iraq's only access to the sea. U.S. artillery units, we do know from Kuwait and on the line of departure, as it's called, fired on Iraqi positions during this initial assault, and we are told from our reporters in the field there was reportedly not much opposition. The U.S. is still updating and trying to assess the damage it caused from last night's cruise missile attacks on Baghdad, mostly cruise missile, but F-117s used in the early attack against the leadership compound. They're clearly going after the Iraqi leadership, including one hoped Saddam Hussein. It's unclear if any of the leaders were killed. Saddam Hussein appears to have shown up on Iraqi television subsequently, and most of the intelligence agencies who have been analyzing his picture on television have decided that it was him. Iraq says that one person died in the attack. We are getting some footage out of Baghdad now from 2 of the Arab news agencies, one belonging to Saudi Arabia and one based in Qatar, which shows that there were people who were reportedly wounded in these attacks taken to the local hospitals, but we have no sense of numbers now, whether they are civilians or not. And this morning, as you've heard perhaps a couple of times, Iraq fired several missiles into Kuwait. They were not Scud missiles, as earlier reported. The U.S. says that 2 of them were knocked down by the U.S. Patriot missiles, the mobile anti-missile batteries which move with U.S. troops as they go forward in some cases. One landed near a military camp in Kuwait, and nobody has been injured in that. And there were a couple of helicopters down, U.S. helicopters down, but there were no injuries in either case. In one case, the helicopter was repaired and went on its mission again. In the other case, it was destroyed by U.S. forces, and that was in the Western Desert. Now, to the White House, to the day at the White House, and our White House correspondent, Terry Moran. Terry?
Peter, there's been a lot of activity here and a sense of exhilaration among a lot of the people you talk to. One official said there's a huge sense of relief now that the waiting is over and at least the very initial stages of the war seem to be progressing. The president, having launched this war, is now pressing it forward in a determined and deliberate fashion on the military front, on the diplomatic front, and on the financial front.
The commander-in-chief, meeting with his cabinet on day 1 of the war, praised the troops now facing danger on his orders.
There's no question we've set the finest of our citizens into harm's way. They perform with great skill and great bravery. We thank them. We thank their loved ones. We appreciate their sacrifice.
And the president, who was cool and terse during the brief session with reporters, sought to reassure the American public.
This cabinet is confident about the future of our country. We're confident we can achieve our objectives. I'm grateful for their service to their country.
Earlier, first thing this morning, the President's War Council gathered at the White House. The #1 item on their agenda, assessing the strike launched last night aimed at Saddam Hussein. Administration officials at first had high hopes the missiles had hit their targets, but later tamped down that speculation. With U.S. troops now engaged alongside British and Australian forces, but without the combat support of any other nation, the White House sought to send a very public message about how broad the president's 40-nation ad hoc Coalition of the Willing is.
All told, the population of the Coalition of the Willing is approximately 1.18 billion people around the world. The coalition countries have a combined GDP of approximately $21.7 trillion. Every major race, religion, and ethnic group in the world is represented.
The president also launched a diplomatic war today, asking 68 countries around the world to expel Iraqi diplomats and cease dealing with the current regime. And the administration sought to dismantle Saddam's government by ordering the seizure of $1.4 billion in Iraqi assets frozen after the first Gulf War.
We're today directing a worldwide hunt for the blood money that Saddam Hussein and his associates have stolen from the Iraqi people.
The bottom line, the U.S. government is now in complete control of that $1.4 billion in frozen U.S. assets, and it will be used by General Tommy Franks and his team to rebuild Iraq when the Americans take over the country. And one more item, Peter, on the humanitarian front. The administration is also moving. They're releasing 600 million tons of grain from an emergency grain reserve in order to address what is expected to be a very serious humanitarian emergency.
Many thanks, Terry Moran, at the White House, in the White House press office this evening. Now let's go back to this invasion from the south. There's a dispatch from the British a short while ago which says, among other things, the 7th Parachute Regiment, the Royal Horse Artillery, crossed the border a couple of hours ago, headed for the oil refineries near Basra. And the reporter who is embedded with them and is apparently getting information, said that they believe in that unit that the invasion was brought forward because of a threat from the Iraqis to do damage in the oil fields. This is a Rumaila field that we've been talking about, which is quite near Basra in the eastern part of the country, and where there may be fires underway in the oil field at the moment. But the lightweight guns of the Marines were called forward, according to this report, by the U.S. They believe it's the start of the ground campaign, and much farther ahead than it was meant to be. This was all supposed to be happening, their reporting says, on Saturday, but they had heard today that Saddam Hussein had probably set fire to the oil refineries at Rumaila, just the other side of the border, and the primary objective of this British component of the coalition forces, which are basically the British and the Americans, was to take a hold of those refineries there so they could not be damaged in any last-minute bid to somehow defend himself against the U.S. attack. Our military consultant, our permanent one, Tony Cordesman, can answer some questions about this. Tony, just if you wouldn't mind giving us in four-letter words what we think may be going on at the moment.
Well, Peter, I think it is fairly clear that we're watching the beginning of a major land invasion, and probably with it the kind of air campaign we've heard. It may not be beginning now. It may wait till it's dark inside Iraq again. But if we look at the map, we can see where our divisions are. Some of them are moving north into the area of Basra, but the main line of advance is probably headed up here. Now, although this looks like there are a lot of Iraqi forces, in fact, these are all low-grade regular divisions, and indeed, even as we move north, we may go very quickly, either to the west of the rivers or up through the main lines there. We don't hit the Republican Guards till we get into this area here. So the next day could have some very, very quick advances, at least in the south.
So, Tony, to turn away from your map there for just a second and just talk to me for a second. So what's it like on the border with this huge force of Americans being told, A, to get up and get moving? We know the Marine Expeditionary Force moved, and now the infantry divisions. How difficult is that? What does it involve? Do they move like a snail, or do they move faster?
I think they're going to move very quickly. They have to move at the rate really dictated by some of the slowest vehicles, but that today is sometimes 20 to 30 miles an hour in unopposed territory. There are not water barriers until they move further north, crossing the border. There are some terrain problems, some low hills, potentially some light Iraqi resistance. I think the real problem for many people is going to be The fear that this is the time Iraq might use chemical weapons. They're concentrated, there are good targets. If Iraq has those weapons forward, it either has to use them or lose them as we advance.
Now, there was one piece of reporting from the front earlier today that they'd been going after an Iraqi position on, as you point out, the sort of the one hill just across the border, which had been used as a spotting position. In the east, where the Marines were going for, there are some land obstacles, if not hugely significant. How do forces deal with them?
Well, at least initially, they may be able to seize the bridges. There's one major bridging exercise till you get into the road junctions around there. But the fact is, Peter, that until they go into the area around Basra, which is filled with canals and water barriers, or they have to go north and east of Basra, there are relatively limited numbers of bridging problems, a limited number of choke points.
Why is Qasr important there on the Shatt al-Arab, on that one waterway?
Well, there is one water crossing there. Qasr is also important, however, as is Fao, because when we look at the economic impact of this war, part of the fear we see is tankers, other ships being unwilling to move until they know there won't be mines, there won't be problems with oil spills, there won't be anti-ship missiles. So when we can secure the coast, secure these oil areas, then I think the world markets are going to be a great deal more reassured than perhaps they are right now.
Yes, it's very interesting. You're going to take us, thank you very much, Tony, for bringing us up, and you bring us to a very important issue now, which is the economy of this today, because I heard it said, ABC's Betsy Stark, our business correspondent today, that the stock market and the oil market today were just absolutely responding bang, 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 bang to the headlines, right?
Hostage to the headlines, Peter, in both cases. I mean, and wild gyrations in each. I mean, let's talk first about the oil market. If you want, reports early this morning that some of those Iraqi oil wells might be on fire sent oil prices higher. And that was the worst fear of traders, that there might be, Saddam might set those oil fields on fire, there might be a disruption of oil supplies. And it wasn't until there was no confirmation of those reports, and there was a sense that if it was true, there were only 4 wells burning, that would be fairly limited damage. We heard today from the Saudis, who reassured us that they would be willing to make up for any loss of production. And the Energy Secretary said, if we have to, we will tap the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. That settled the oil markets.
Would you like to go on with your economics report in general now?
Absolutely. The cost of this war is an economic issue. It's an issue of national priorities, and it's a political issue. The Bush administration so far has refused to say what it thinks the war will cost, but the bill started mounting long before the fighting began. Getting the military's high-tech arsenal halfway around the world, along with 250,000 troops, has been a roughly $13 billion undertaking.
This is more armored vehicles than I've ever seen. More vehicles than I've probably ever seen in one place.
And the monthly cost of maintaining this force is expected to be around $9 billion.
A lot of the costs are very kind of mundane costs, like bringing in food, building laundry facilities for troops in the region, paying combat pay for military personnel, activating the reserves.
Everything that will be used in this war has been bought and paid for already. From the $55 bullets and $1 million cruise missiles to the $4 billion aircraft carriers and the $50 million jets on board. But what taxpayers may not realize is that many things will have to be paid for again.
One of the costs of the war will be replacing equipment we lose in combat or in accidents.
How expensive the fighting part of the war is depends on the intensity of battle and how long it lasts. The estimates range from $18 billion for a 1-month war to $85 billion for a 6-month war. Sound expensive? It's probably the cheap part.
What makes this war potentially expensive is the number of years that we might be in occupation.
Securing the peace in Iraq is expected to cost far more than waging the war. It's a process likely to require thousands of American troops and up to a decade of reconstruction and humanitarian aid.
We're talking about as much as $50 billion a year for 10 years. Well, you can see that gets very expensive and dwarfs dramatically the cost of the combat phase.
Some wonder if the nation can afford this war and everything else on the president's agenda.
We can afford a war. We can afford domestic programs. We can afford tax cuts. The problem is we probably can't afford them all at once.
Whatever this war costs, and remember, this time the United States is defending itself on the home front, too. It will add to a $250 billion deficit. And this time, Peter, of course, there are no allies promising to foot part of the bill.
There'll be an effort, I think, from the Bush administration to get this international community of the willing now to participate in the reconstruction. When you talk to traders and dealers and whatnot on the street in the last couple of days, what do they think about a short war, longer war, and a long war?
Well, they're clearly betting on a very short and very successful war, which is why you saw the Dow up 800 points in the past week, and while oil prices have come down from almost $40 a barrel to $28 a barrel. So the market's getting ahead of itself here, but that's what they're counting on at the moment.
The oil market generally is one of the most explosive markets and emotional markets in the world, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, and the stock market too. And war fears had been driving stock prices down, oil prices up. Now these sort of, this hopeful sense that it'll be short, it'll be a quick, decisive victory is what's calmed the markets. But markets react to extremes on either side. I think that's part of what we're seeing now. Clearly, they're getting ahead of themselves.
Well, you lead me right into the stock market. Thank you very much indeed for this. Betsy Stark on Wall Street today. The markets did indeed, as Betsy said, move up and down with the news from Iraq, and by the end of trading, some investors took the ground offensive by the U.S. as an indication that war with Iraq will be shorter, as Betsy said, rather than longer. And the Dow Jones Industrial Average was, at the end of the day, up 21 points to close at 82.86. On the NASDAQ, stocks gained more than 5 points. We have been getting some video in from Baghdad at the moment from both Al Arabiya, which is a new television cable satellite network in the Middle East, funded in Saudi Arabia. Now you have two, Al Arabiya from Saudi Arabia and Al Jazeera, which is owned by the Qataris, where Central Command is located. We cannot tell you what these pictures represent, except some poor child has been hurt. We do not know how, but they are reporting tonight that 37 people have been injured in the course of attacks on Baghdad today, and that is all we can tell you. It's a little out of context, but there it is. But Richard Engel is in Baghdad again, and this is his compilation of the last few hours there.
Peter, the air raid sirens signal that for the second night in a row, Baghdad came under attack by cruise missiles. This time, it was more intense. The targets were mainly government ministry buildings, including one associated with the Interior Ministry. After the first night of bombing, Saddam Hussein, or someone who looks just like him, appeared on the Iraqi television and delivered a message of support, calling on the Arab world and Muslim world to rally behind Iraq and support what he called their jihad against the evil little Bush, to use his terminology. Then there was a tour organized by the Government Information Ministry, taken to hospitals, shown people who are reportedly injured in the latest series of bombing raids. The streets of Baghdad are quiet in general. There are sandbags and there are more and more soldiers on the streets. People do, however, go out during the day and try and do whatever shopping they need to do. Now, that very few stores are open. Most Iraqis are calm. They've been living under war for a long time, and it doesn't seem that these bombing raids, although they have a psychological effect on a lot of people who aren't used to it, I think for the Iraqis, so far they seem to be quite calm about the whole thing. Peter?
Calm so far anyway. Thank you very much, Richard Engel. In Baghdad again, where it is now 20 minutes after 3 in the morning. Let's return to this question of homeland security here. We talked a little earlier to Pierre Thomas about be on the lookout for a man who they were very interested in having a handle on today because there may be some connections with Al-Qaeda. But for law enforcement generally, with this campaign beginning, it has been a very busy day all across the country. We go back to Washington and Pierre Thomas. Pierre?
Peter, it's been a very intense day, and tonight the FBI is racing to find any hint of an attack by Al-Qaeda or agents of Saddam Hussein.
The FBI today issued an all-points bulletin for this man, Adnan al-Shukrijama. Sources tell ABC News the FBI suspects he is an Al-Qaeda member who may be planning an attack against the U.S. He is described by law enforcement sources as a pilot and an Al-Qaeda field commander who has lived in Saudi Arabia. Sources tell ABC News the government believes Shukrijama was trained in Afghanistan under 9/11 planner Ramzi al-Bin al-Shibh. The FBI has no idea where Shouk Rijema is, but believes he may have lived in South Florida near some of the 9/11 hijackers. Today, FBI Director Robert Mueller said every lead is being run down and announced an interview campaign, which sources tell ABC News will target 15,000 Iraqis living in the U.S. in less than 3 weeks. Some will be detained on immigration violations. Many U.S. Iraqis say they fled Saddam Hussein's oppression and are perplexed about why the FBI wants to interview them.
We are the ones who are working day and night very hard to topple the regime of Saddam Hussein.
The FBI interviews are voluntary and are supposed to be non-confrontational. But some administration officials admit the campaign is meant to have a chilling effect on any possible terrorist plans. It is all part of an orchestrated national show of force, part of the most intense security since the 9/11 attacks. Increased protection at nuclear power plants, including the nation's largest facility in Palo Verde, New Mexico. In Los Angeles, stepped up scrutiny at water treatment plants. In New York City, expanded patrols by heavily armed police.
We've been out here way before midnight. We stopped about 70 cars so far.
And today, 700 National Guard and state police deployed to protect trains and subways serving New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey.
It's a message to terrorists that we're not going to let you do it. And it's also a message to all of the rest of us to say, we're there. You can depend on us.
The show of force is to compensate for the fact that the FBI has few, if any, specifics to go on. Peter?
Pierre, almost every time there's an FBI warning like this to all the police departments and the first responders across the country, they feel additional pressure and they feel resource poorer. Is that too much of a, is that too strong a generalization?
You're exactly right, Peter. The FBI and law enforcement around the country, they have to expend tremendous resources to run down these leads. And they have not got the money they say they need from the federal government, but they say the work still has to go on.
Now, you look at this on a day-to-day basis, and we talk on a day-to-day basis about the ups and downs of what they're hearing and the chatter and everything else. Do you detect a deepening intensity now that this campaign is beginning than there was, say, a week ago?
Well, I talked with a very senior FBI official the other week, and he said that when the war started, that was the time when he would be most concerned. They're particularly concerned about al-Qaeda, also agents of Saddam Hussein, but also lone wolves, individuals who might attack just because of anger by the war.
At the same time, Pierre, I think a lot of laymen, myself included, say, gosh, terrorists, wherever they operate, always hit when we least expect it, not when we most expect it.
That's right, but Peter, the FBI and law enforcement officials say they're not in a position to take any chances, and one official said, look, the terrorists only have to hit one run.
I agree, and it's really interesting when the Attorney General was popping back and forth on television all the time. He got criticized, in fact, pulled back by the White House at one point, but the truth of the matter is nobody wanted to be a public official and get on and make the announcement that something hadn't happened if he or she had not issued a public warning to law enforcement all over the country. Speaking of security restrictions, there have been some changes in Washington today at the U.S. Capitol building and others. Is Linda Douglas ready at the moment? Okay,
Yes, I am,
Linda
Peter.
Douglas is on Capitol Hill, and you've had some tighter restrictions there and in other government buildings tonight.
Well, high officials here inside the Capitol have just announced that they are going to suspend all public tours, all the people who come in to see the Capitol, to see their government operating, starting tomorrow. Now, this is a temporary measure, Peter, and they are saying that there is no specific threat aimed at the Capitol. But as we've been reporting all along, all of the intelligence indicates that clearly a target would be an institution such as this, a symbol of American power, and the Capitol certainly is that.
Just how restricted have tours been in the last couple of weeks? I was up there a couple of weeks ago, didn't see a solitary tourist.
It's really started to change, Peter, since September 11th. I mean, in my observation, it's changed so profoundly. They began to push all of the tourists out, all the children, all of the schools that come through here. They didn't have the freedom to roam and mingle with all the office holders the way they always have traditionally in our system of government. It's been an empty place. But in the last 3 or 4 weeks, they've let the tourists back in. There's a system now. They go through security. They get a pass from their elected representative. They've been going through the chambers and watching their government operate, it's almost been back to normal in spite of the giant walls and security system that now surround the Capitol. But that will end, at least for a while, tomorrow.
Yesterday at this time, you and I were talking about a very passionate debate on the floor of the Senate about whether or not the war should have started. Senator Byrd of Virginia against John McCain of Arizona. Not against, but both of them speaking very passionately. Have people coalesced now behind the effort today?
Well, they're trying to, Peter. Certainly the Democrats in the Senate gave a very dignified performance today. They said that they reserved their right to disagree with the president on policy, but now is the time to end debate, to rally around the commander-in-chief. There was a resolution passed, as we reported, by the Senate unanimously to support the president as commander-in-chief and the troops. In the House, though, Peter, it is a different story. There are Democrats there who are balking at language that the House Republicans are trying to put in that resolution to commend the president for his decisive leadership and for using this as a way to end the war on terrorism. Democrats object. They don't want to praise the president to that extent, so they haven't agreed yet.
But even in the Senate today, I gather the resolution or the sense of the Senate end up with respect for the supreme commander without naming the president particularly.
Well, they didn't name President Bush particularly, but Republicans who were involved in these negotiations with Democrats say that they really did stop their feuding pretty quickly. They understand that what their role is in the government, what their role is in an international crisis, in a military situation. All of these senators have constituents who have loved ones who are, overseas fighting this war, and every one of them talked about their own people at home. So they see the president as the commander-in-chief in a situation like this.
Thanks very much, Linda Douglas. It does always tend to ease quicker, sooner in the Senate than it does in the House of Representatives. We'll catch you up on that when it occurs. One thing we're very mindful about, at least I hope we're very mindful about in terms of our general coverage, is that we tend at a moment like this, and it hasn't happened in more than a decade, to talk a lot about military systems and weapons. And while we have an enormous number of women in the armed forces now, one of our women colleagues pointed out today that we might do a little better with women if we made the weapons discussion somewhat simpler, to which I think I fairly responded. We might make it simpler for men as well. So we're going to try to do that. We've talked a lot about the Patriot missile, for example, which got a lot of attention during the Gulf War, in part because it was seen as a very heroic weapon at the beginning of the Gulf War and turned out not to be the case. This was the weapon that was deployed on the eastern perimeter of Israel, which did not succeed in shooting down the Scud missiles which Saddam Hussein directed at the Israelis during the Gulf War. Well, this weapon has apparently been much refined and much improved. We can talk about that in the future, but here on the Patriots is ABC's Ned Potter.
Sirens going off in Kuwait, people fumbling with gas masks. But in the midst of it, the Pentagon says something very reassuring happened. Patriot missiles, launched to intercept 2 attack rockets from Iraq, apparently worked.
This is probably the hardest mission that we have in combat. We're not very good at this.
Joseph Cirincione, who ran a congressional investigation of Patriot missiles in 1991, says they were seen as the miracle weapons of the first Gulf War.
Thank God for the Patriot missile. Thank God for that missile.
But in retrospect, soldiers concede the impression was wrong.
The technology wasn't there to do it. It's basically like hitting a bullet with a bullet. The technology wasn't there.
Back in '91, the Pentagon thought the Patriots intercepted more than 40 Iraqi Scuds. Later investigation showed that more likely they only destroyed 4.
The first kill estimates are invariably wrong. It's not because anybody's lying, it's because in the excitement of battle, in the confusion of battle, people think they saw things that they didn't see.
But in the decades since, the Patriots have been heavily upgraded. They are launched, as we see in this test, when satellites or radar spot incoming missiles. The newest generation, called PAC-3, is designed to be highly maneuverable, predicting the path of its fast-moving target and using onboard radar to lock onto it. PAC-3s do not even carry explosives. They are meant to destroy the enemy missile just by hitting it. Skeptics warn the Patriots are still far from foolproof, but say they are still badly needed.
Even a basic Scud missile or a cruise missile with a conventional explosive warhead can cause a lot of damage.
And there were more sirens in Kuwait tonight. Ned Potter, ABC News, New York.
Just to be clear, and I hope not add to the confusion about the Patriot missiles, there were, as you know, 5, 6, or 7, we've never been quite certain yet, missiles that were fired by the Iraqis across the Kuwaiti-Iraqi border today. They did no harm, though they scared a lot of people. These were tactical missiles, short-range missiles, those which, among other things, Iraq is permitted to have, and not which would normally be handled by a Patriot missile. But they did get through the defenses and scared the Kuwaitis, many of them today. This is ABC News continuing live coverage of the war against Iraq. Hello again, everybody. I'm Peter Jennings at ABC News headquarters in New York. It is 7:30 here in the East, 4:30 in the West. We recognize that not everybody's been sitting around the television all day. It is 3:30 in the morning in Baghdad and Kuwait and other important and anxious capitals in the Middle East itself. We're continuing our coverage. Some of you normally at this time of day would be getting ABC's World News Tonight. You're getting a much expanded version today. But the attack against the Iraqis now seems to be a good deal more underway than it was several hours ago. The Marine Expeditionary Force has gone across in some measure the frontier between Kuwait and Iraq. The 3rd Infantry Division, we were told a short while ago, has gone across. So you've got 2 columns going into southern Iraq at the moment. And now that the Turkish government has permitted the United States freedom to fly through Turkish airspace, it is quite possible that you'll begin to get American assets coming into the northern part of Iraq, and we'll talk about this as we get along in this particular half hour. But after night fell in Baghdad today, British and Iraqi forces launched a new round of cruise missile attacks fired from warships and from submarines in the Persian Gulf and in the Red Sea, much longer travel from the Red Sea to their targets in Iraq. They were designed to hit government facilities in Baghdad. ABC's Richard Engel reports from Baghdad this evening that government buildings, including the Interior Ministry, were set on fire. And U.S. forces, I've said, have launched this ground attack. We are not yet absolutely certain and are yet to get the word from CENTCOM that this huge operation that we had been anticipating is moving in all of its parts. But there are reports, as I said, that the first armies have crossed into Iraq. U.S. artillery units were involved along the Iraq-Kuwait frontier this morning, suppressing Iraqi fire, and we believe attacking Iraqi installations in southern Iraq. A U.S. Apache attack helicopter was shot down, Ted Koppel told us, by small arms fire just on the other side of the Iraq-Kuwait border, but the crew was not hurt, and they sent in a crew and managed to get the Apache up and flying again. And as you may have heard many hours ago, another American helicopter was shot down is a helicopter carrying special forces troops or carrying troops, we were told, was shot down in western Iraq, and everybody on board of that was rescued. And now I believe we are going to go and hear from ABC's Don Dahler, who's embedded with the 101st Airborne Division, and he compiled this for us a little while ago. I beg your pardon. You're back live.
Peter, I can tell you, I agree with what you were just saying. I am hearing from the people here at the 101st that the massive ground war has not started. That the way it was explained to me is that we are going to be seeing small activities throughout southern Iraq, but do not consider that the massive G-Day, as they call it. However, they have warned that the timetable, because of other events, including the fact that they believe they've located missile sites in southern Iraq that pose a threat, that the timetable might have been moved up. I cannot specifically talk about the battle plans for the 101st, but it is safe for me to talk about capabilities. And you mentioned northern Iraq, places like that. One of the possibilities for a unit like the 101st, because of their great flexibility and the fact that they can take a brigade-sized unit, take them in helicopters and get them on the ground sometimes over 100 miles behind enemy lines, makes them very attractive for the war planners when they're looking at putting them into strategic points, for instance, airfields or bridges that they have to hold and protect for when the 3rd Infantry Division starts to roll across. Those are the roles that we can see and expect the 101st units of the 101st to take part in as the days unfold. You also have to remember, though, they are, at heart, an infantry division. They put boots on the ground, and they're very effective in that role as well.
Okay, Don, thank you very much. As Don Dahler points out, we are not nor eager to say those things which local commanders, either that or in Central Command, don't permit or wish us to say under the circumstances. We get a lot of email from people around the country who wonder whether or not with reports like that we actually put American lives at risk, and the only answer that we can really give you is that our reporters in the field do not say things on television which they have not cleared with their local commanders. They all have a fairly strict set of guidelines about what they're able to say and what they are not able to say. On occasion, it is perfectly possible that a reporter may make a mistake, but we try very hard not to do so. Let's go to the White House. ABC's Terry Moran. Terry, we haven't seen the president today. They've all gone to ground pretty much in the White House today. Give us as much as you can.
Well, Peter, we did hear from the president today, just to remind you, in that cabinet meeting. He held a cabinet meeting, a war cabinet meeting, and did have very brief remarks to a pool of reporters that was let in, complimenting the actions of the military and sending his support to the troops and trying to reassure the home front as well. But there are no plans now for any further addresses by the president, certainly. He leaves for Camp David tomorrow afternoon at 1:30. But we are hearing from the president in another way, in a series of executive orders and executive actions that show a kind of cascading plan of action on other fronts aside from the military front that is now taking place. You see just how carefully planned this regime change in Iraq was. It's not just the military. He's handed that off to the generals. What you see is diplomatic action. The president has requested 68 countries around the world to expel senior Iraqi diplomats and stop dealing with this regime. They've frozen more than $1 billion in Iraqi assets in this country and essentially seized them, vested them. They are now under the control of the United States government. And there have been some humanitarian actions, an executive order releasing 600,000 tons of grain for the expected humanitarian emergency and $22 million to help with that humanitarian issue that will arise shortly. So this is obviously coordinated with military action and very carefully planned.
You do remind me, I must say, of how long a day it has been, because you're quite right. We did see the president talking before the cabinet meeting, and I guess what I was asking is whether, at least I hope it's what I was asking, was whether or not you think he will speak to the American public again, and the answer is no. And that leaves us, at the moment, and that leaves us a bit in limbo as to whether we're looking at a full-scale attack or not, or as far as the White House is concerned, is it just simply underway?
He has signed the execute order, as they call it. That's a classified document which authorizes this. He did that Wednesday morning. He asked, we're told, 2 questions of all the generals in the field who were gathered by video conference, the senior leaders, generals and admirals who are leading this operation. He asked 2 very general questions. Do you have everything you need to win? Are you comfortable with the strategy? Put each one of them on record that they are ready to go under these conditions, and he is now stepping back. It is very typical of this president that he does not have a lot to say at major moments after he said his piece. That speech to the country last night, these brief remarks with his cabinet, I don't expect to hear him again for a couple of days.
Thanks, Terry, very much. Terry Moran at the White House. By the way, some of the military commanders in the field and in Washington have not been particularly comfortable with the strategy, not particularly comfortable with the pace, but as Terry points out, at a moment like this, the president is the commander-in-chief. The Secretary of Defense talked to the troops today, made a recorded speech for the troops, and because of the technology now available in so much of the region, though certainly not in the combat units at the front at this moment, they've been able to hear Donald Rumsfeld himself. And here's a brief excerpt.
When I returned to the Pentagon after serving here a quarter of a century ago, I wrote a series of guidelines to help guide my thinking regarding the use of force. They included these questions. Is there a good reason to go to war? Have we engaged all instruments of national power in search of a peaceful solution? Is the objective achievable? Have we set forth clear goals? Does the objective merit risking American lives? Have we made available all the resources and military capabilities needed to achieve victory? Have we invested the effort and the political capital to explain the need for action and to marshal and sustain public support? Have we been honest with ourselves and with the world about the risks of action, but also about the less obvious risks of inaction? The President has made the case for Iraq clear. He has set forth what is at stake and invested the diplomatic and political effort needed to exhaust all options short of war. We are at the point at which the risk of not acting is too great to wait longer. The answers are clear. It is essential to world peace and our security that we act against the regime of Saddam Hussein.
The Secretary of Defense talking to forces in the field today, and I think we know from the experience of the run-up to this war that that is the kind of speech which will receive wide-felt support in the country and wide-felt criticism here at home and overseas as well. As you saw, a tremendous number of overseas demonstrations today have not abated, and there were a number of anti-war demonstrations around the country today, not of huge proportion, but you continue to see anti-war ads in the newspapers in the country as well, and a lot of people who will disagree with Mr. Rumsfeld, but that was certainly his message and will be taken as a very spirited message by the troops who are in the field tonight. Now to ABC's John McWethy at the Pentagon. John, before I ask you about a question of coverage, is there latest news?
There is a number of pieces of late news, Peter. Number one, Don Rumsfeld right now is up in a top-secret briefing telling members of the House what it is that the U.S. is doing and what the strategy is and how it's going. This is part of his effort to win support of lawmakers that have sometimes been critical of the strategy. But out in the field, this, I think, is going to prove, this next 24-hour period is going to prove to be one of the most dramatic of this entire campaign, however long it goes. This is the beginning of, truly the beginning of the march to Baghdad. This administration hopes it's going to go rapidly, but they don't know. This is also the beginning of the execution of what I would call a Rumsfeld strategy. He firmly believes that parts of Saddam Hussein's support structure is beginning to crumble. And he feels by exerting the kind of military force that the United States is now exerting, that he is going to, in his view, create mass defections from Saddam's inner circle. There are people who listen to this kind of strategy and think that Don Rumsfeld does not have an adequate appreciation of the tyranny that Saddam Hussein has ruled his country with. But nonetheless, there are some encouraging signs from high levels in some of the Republican Guard units that are reaching out, apparently, to agents of the U.S.
There's something else, John, which I think I am noticing. Mr. Rumsfeld and elements in the military have argued for a long time as to whether there should be what's called simultaneity between an attack on the ground and these attacks on the air. And we had anticipated at least a couple of days of softening up the Iraqis from the air, and now, apparently, we have U.S. ground forces going across the borders at exactly the same time. So there's this huge operation, I assume, going on in the air and on the ground at the moment, which is the way Mr. Rumsfeld always wanted it.
Well, he has long felt that the military sometimes is too risk-averse. And he, with the amount of force that Don Rumsfeld has permitted to be in this area, it's always been a compromise between the top uniform officers and the Secretary of Defense, that this will be a very fast-moving force, not nearly as large as some of the uniformed people might have wanted, but it has turned out to be a quite large force. I think we're going to see here in the next 24 hours there's going to be 60 or 70,000 U.S. and British forces working their way up towards Baghdad. That's a pretty impressive force.
Exactly, and the air component as well. Now, let me ask you about the business of coverage. everybody you and I both talked to in the military command, I think, has been very enthusiastic about having reporters with them and on the ground. The Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff has been enthusiastic. General Franks himself was enthusiastic when I saw him only a few days ago in the Gulf. But he's irritated about something today, and I wonder if we can get a handle on it and what effect we think it'll have on informing the public.
I don't know that we can get a handle on it, but I think there are some important measurements that we can take at this point. I think Don Rumsfeld appears to be happy with the relationship that the press and the military have managed to forge going into this campaign. Thus far, he has seen no egregious examples of the press jeopardizing the forces. I think the president is happy with the kind of coverage that has been handled thus far. So it may not ultimately matter what the commander out in the field who is actually running this war thinks. I have a feeling that things will ease up, although I must say our reporters, ABC's reporters, have been able to file quite regularly, and many of them are right in the middle of the thick of it.
We shall see how things go. And I don't mean to be too glib about this, John, so please don't make fun of me. But you just saw on our television there sort of a graphic of tanks going through the berms which are built on the Iraqi-Kuwaiti border and tanks smoothly running up onto the desert plain to the west. I have to tell you, this is probably a better representation of what the space over southern Iraq looks like tonight. And just you could draw as many lines on this piece of paper as you wanted. And if this is the beginning of this huge, massive operation that we've all been briefed on in one way, shape, or form, that represents all the aircraft up, all the AWACS, the people that sort of guide the various aircraft from the air, all of the tankers that are in the air, the fighters that are coming and going from various targets. And one of the things that commanders, John, answer this one more question for me. One of the things that commanders have really worried about in this opening days of this overwhelming assault was confusion in the air and the real possibility of friendly fire accidents.
Definitely friendly fire. That is something that the U.S. has been very concerned about, and they've invested in technology and they've invested in training to better identify where American forces are on the ground. When you get into trouble, it is when forces are moving very fast and when the battlefield is confused. This will be a relatively fast-moving force, and it is going to be broken into many parts as it moves north towards Baghdad. So there is that risk, and certainly the traffic management in the sky is an issue, but I think officials, the military folks, feel that they have it under control. They know that there is chaos when you have a battlefield, period, and they are trained, although they have a plan, they have time hacks that they're supposed to meet, milestones they're supposed to meet. They know that things always change. The moment real contact begins, things change. And the Secretary proved that immediately, and the President, by starting this campaign in a way that was totally outside of the plan itself.
You know, John, you prove again you're better than graphics. Many thanks indeed. John McCarthy at the Pentagon will come back in the course of the evening. Now we're joined by ABC consultant Dick Richard Clark, who has served in the Bush administration and the Clinton administration. You've been a counter-terrorist operator in the Gulf War. You helped to coordinate the State Department and the military components of that war. What's your take on the day so far?
Well, Peter, I'm impressed by the flexibility the administration has shown in two regards. Yesterday, reacting very quickly to word from the Director of Central Intelligence, George Tenet, that there was a target of opportunity, and going first, followed by a presidential address that we weren't supposed to hear for a couple of days. And now today, when there were reports of missiles being launched and perhaps reports of oil fields being lit on fire, I suspect the commander, Tommy Franks, asked for permission to begin early on the ground in one limited area, and he got that permission.
And do you have any sense of what it means to suddenly move the schedule up that dramatically, maybe even by 24 hours?
Well, I don't think it means as much as we might think. Right. I think the big, heavy, clunky military operation with thousands of cruise missiles and sorties is still to come, and that'll come on schedule. In the first day of the attack in the last war, in the air war, we hit 45 different sites in Baghdad on the first night. We had 1,300 sorties the first day. This is much, much smaller, and we'd all been led to expect.
This is smaller?
This is much, much smaller than the first day.
Well, this has turned out to be smaller because the first day is really different than perhaps everybody anticipated.
I think the real first day here hasn't come yet.
Right.
But this is my point. The administration is showing flexibility, both with regard to the CIA operation yesterday and with regard to the Marine operation today. And we may be lulled into thinking everything is going swimmingly because we've taken H3, perhaps the airport in the west. We've taken them
huge air bases in the western desert to which the U.S. can fly in both man and material.
Right, twice the size of Heathrow in London. Enormous airport. We've probably taken Qasr, the port, the major port in the south. Now with Turkish permission.
What is the significance of taking Qasr, the port on the waterway into Iraq at the south? Because nobody's going to go in and out of there in the course of a war anyway, are they?
No, I think the only significance is that we're sealing off Basra and Qasr so that we can move quickly to the north.
In other words, so the U.S. can move in supplies by sea as well as by land.
By sea, amphibiously. So everything seems to be moving swimmingly. And we have to be very cautious. This first day seems to be going well for us. But Saddam Hussein has things up his sleeve. We don't know what they are. But he had several things up his sleeve last time. He attacked Israel. He blew up oil fields. He put oil into the Persian Gulf. He had human shields. He's got a plan. He knew this was coming. We just haven't seen his plan yet. And what his plan is likely to be is to try somehow to slow the U.S. advance down and appeal for world support, to show U.S. atrocities, to show women and children being killed, and then appeal for the UN Security Council, for his friends, the Russians and the French and others, to come into the UN Security Council.
Based on the Bush administration's relationship with the UN Security Council, it wouldn't make much difference.
Well, I know, but what we may see is the UN Security Council asking for a ceasefire. That may be what is in Saddam's head. We have to try to figure out what is his strategy.
I'm not sure you're exactly the right person to do this, but maybe you can try, which is to give us a word picture of the special operations element in today, because we have this sense that special operation forces have come in from a variety of different places. Do you know where where they're operating? Do you know sort of in general terms what they're trying to accomplish?
Well, I think special operations forces have probably been in for a few days.
Right, yeah.
They've jumped off from a place in Saudi Arabia, I suspect, a place called RR. They've jumped off from a Jordanian Air Force base near the Iraqi border. They're probably now staging into Turkey so they can jump off from there. British and U.S. SEALs have probably come up the river into Qasr. So that we have a number of people that are well forward from these units that we're seeing on TV.
And while Saddam Hussein may intellectually know that, this could be a tremendous surprise or shock to Iraqi military commanders in these particular regions? Or are they, how well trained are they? How good are they?
The U.S. Special Forces are very good.
No, I mean the Iraqis.
Well, the Iraqis are not, but what the U.S. Special Forces may be trying to do is arrange ceasefires, to reach out for local commanders and say, as Don Rumsfeld said in his press conference this morning, this war doesn't have to be the way that you think it is.
Very first thing he said.
First thing he said. I think it's consistent with his overall strategy is if units want to surrender, if regional commanders want to give us ceasefires, then that's fine, and they won't be punished.
You were last question for now, but please don't go away. You were very instrumental in the opening days of Gulf War, and the U.S. was not really prepared for the huge number of Iraqis who surrendered, didn't have any people to take care of them, didn't have any place to put them. It's been a very, very clear component of planning for this campaign, which is to try to leave them in place and go around them. Right?
I think we're going to leave a lot of them in place and go around them after we have received promises from them that they're not going to fire on our troops as our troops go by.
This is a familiar picture, of course, from 1991, and as we've been told by many commanders on the ground, in fact, a week or so ago, there were, many thousands of military policemen which were still at sea on their way to Kuwait, and this component, at least commanders in the region believe, was not yet put together, but they would not like to have to deal with taking care of all these Iraqi prisoners as they did in the Gulf War, which means feeding them and preventing the kind of discipline problems you get when you have a lot of men with nothing to do on their hands. So they've taken a different tack this time. Dick Clark, thanks very much. Please stay with us for a while. One of the things you may have picked up today is the change of attitude in Kuwait. The Kuwaitis have been fairly relaxed about this war. They had this huge American force up on the border. They had the Patriot missiles on the border. Well, they had a really rough day. Nobody was hurt, to the best of our knowledge, but psychologically, it was traumatic. Here's ABC's Jim Wooten.
This morning in this city, the hustle and bustle as the wheels of Kuwaiti commerce began to turn. Suddenly, the first of several air raid alerts. And suddenly, the unthinkable was thinkable, as real as the wail of the sirens on the streets, on local TV screens, on downtown buildings, in the hotels, on the faces of Kuwaitis.
Out of the way, please.
And foreign journalists too, those on the air.
Yeah, so I am supposed to put on the mask, and that is what exactly I am going to do.
And those behind the cameras.
If you can hear me, we have sirens going off here.
Or down in the shelters, some wondering perhaps how wise it was to accept an assignment within range of Iraqi missiles. Outside, a Czech decontamination team tests the air for gas, and a hotel doorman
Come in inside now, please.
urges guests to take cover. Some do, some don't, and some couldn't care less. They refuse to think the unthinkable. A few police seem almost embarrassed to protect themselves, as though it's unmanly. Ditto for some camera crews. And just up the road, U.S. troops also got wind of the alert and struggled into their chemical gear. Even after dark, the threat continued for civilians and soldiers. And at the end of the day, while there was no panic, none in evidence at any rate, there was for many here a realization that if the Iraqis are outgunned and outmanned, and if they do face an inevitable defeat, at least some of them will not go quietly. And in the downtown streets tonight, an empty waiting, a nervous listening for the next siren that makes it clear this is a war zone too. Jim Wooten, ABC News, Kuwait City.
As we said, something the Kuwaitis had not expected a week ago, when they were all quite relaxed about the air. The international airlines stopped moving into Kuwait City, and the Kuwait Airlines continued to operate, but a lot of Kuwaitis, including Americans married to Kuwaitis as well, said they were not leaving town. But they've all had, as Jim says, a very anxious day. We now have ABC's Bob Woodruff on the line, who is with the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force somewhere along the Kuwaiti-Iraq border. Bob, 5 to 4 in the morning.
Hey, Peter, good
morning, 5 to 4 in the morning,
Peter,
your
yes,
time.
It's very early in the morning, and I can tell you that we are still waiting here, ready to move. We have an inexplicable delay, which I can't even tell you exactly the reason for it. But let me just tell you what I'm seeing on the horizon, which is quite eerie. I don't know if others have reported this or not, but at quite a distance away, we see a very large fire. Flames are licking up toward the sky. I can't tell from here exactly how high they are going, but a big orange flame on the horizon, another smaller one to the right. But on the large one, which appears to be, and it makes sense that it would be, an oil fire of some kind, and a very large cloud of smoke and oil debris, I would imagine, hanging above the fire, right just north of the border. It's hard to tell how far, but probably 10, 15 kilometers north of the border, it appears to be.
Can you tell, perhaps by looking at a map, which I know you have access to, where the fires are? Are they to the east? Are they near Basra? Might they be at one of the refineries along the waterway there?
I believe it would not be complete all the way to Basra. It would be more west of Basra. North of the border, certainly, but west of Basra. It could be one of the gas-oil separation plants. It could be an oil platform of some kind. It's only worth guessing, but it's not as far as Basra, Peter. I do not believe. It looks as if it might be a little bit west of that area.
And now tell us, if you can, or tell us what you can about your last, I think it's 5 or 6 or 7 hours since we've spoken to you.
We have been sitting, Peter. And that's one reason why I haven't spoken to you. I've been waiting to go in. The last that we heard, as I told you last time, there was some problems with some mines that we're trying to clear out. We have heard some very heavy pounding up north of the border, whether that is planes or artillery or both. And there's obviously trying to soften the way for us to get in. Other units in the Marines have clearly already gotten in. We, for some reason, when we were supposed to go in very, very early in this fight, and we have been delayed to the west. So for the most part, we have been sitting and waiting to go in and watching the horizon in front of us.
And you know why you're being delayed, even though you cannot tell us, or is it not explainable to you either?
We've been having trouble getting an explanation for that, actually, on the vehicles that we're traveling on. It's a need-to-know basis only. And I think it still has to do with the mechanized equipment having to go through and clear the mines out. But I may have more information on that very soon, because I think we are about ready to pull out. We have just fired up our engines for the first time in about 5 hours, and we're ready to get on the move again. So hopefully I'll be able to give you another call back very soon and let you know what's happening.
Okay, Bob, many thanks indeed. ABC's Bob Woodruff, who is with the Marine Expeditionary Force on the Kuwaiti-Iraqi border, 4 o'clock in the morning his time. We can just go back very quickly to that map of the oil fields in the south where Bob believes he sees a fire. May well be in the Rumaila field, which is the most productive oil field in Iraq before the Gulf War. Their big oil fields are here, and then up northern towards Kirkuk, up towards the northern fly zone, up towards Kurdish Iraq. And they have been an issue of considerable debate today. First, we had some suggestions that there were oil wells on fire or oil installations on fire. Weren't quite sure what they were. Then we had some reporters on the border who said they couldn't see anything up in the General Basra area. And now we have ABC's Bob Woodruff, who's got a different perspective, and he sees a quite large fire in what may or may not be the Rumaila field, which is the closest one to the border. This is ABC News continuing live coverage of the war with Iraq. Hello again, everybody. I'm Peter Jennings at ABC News headquarters in New York. This is our continuing coverage of the campaign against Iraq. We are very much in the dark about some things, and we know a fair amount of some other things that have transpired. And at the beginning of every hour, it's now 8 o'clock in the east, 5 o'clock in the west, and 4 o'clock in the morning on the battlefield. These are some of the things that we know have transpired today. We know that there were various strikes by the U.S. today in Baghdad itself and up towards Basra. We also know the British were involved in an operation going across the Kuwaiti-Iraq border up towards Basra, the first important city, 1,300,000 people on the way to Baghdad. Been an issue of huge speculation as to how people in Basra would respond to U.S. and or British forces, because it's a largely Shiite Muslim population, the majority population in Iraq, but the leader, Saddam Hussein, is a Sunni, and the Shiites have been profoundly repressed by the Sunni leadership for many, many years, particularly in the south. And this is one of the places where the Americans believe they really will be greeted with flowers and not with bullets. But there are, as our military analysts tell us, some armies deployed in the area between the Kuwait border and Basra. Certainly, the question is, what will they do? Whether it's Revolutionary Guard farther up or the regular army farther to the south, will they put their weapons down and decide not to fight? We also know, of course, that the U.S. launched another series of strikes on Baghdad. U.S. and British forces again used cruise missiles fired from the Persian Gulf and from the Red Sea. It is a British pool report we had earlier today that the Royal Commandos were involved in their biggest operation since the Falkland War, as they launched an attack on southern Iraq.